text because if Yuma
Right,
is
let's
famous
go.
for
This
one
guy's all
thing,
mad
it
at
is
me
for
right
being
now.
home to the Yuma Territorial Prison.
9-12
This
underdog
was
right
the
now.
Alcatraz
We'll
of
get
the
this though,
Old
and I'll
West,
be at
an
the top of the
icon
leaderboard.
of Western history, and I'm sorry to say, I have never actually been out here before. I am eager to correct that mistake because believe me, over all these years filming in the Old West, particularly out in Arizona, places like Tombstone, things like that, people are always asking me, have you ever been to Yuma yet? Have you seen the prison? Well, we're finally doing it. Finally going to jail. My teachers always said I'd go to prison one day. Mom will be so proud. All right, here's the entrance just over this way. And it's funny because the freeway, Interstate 8, and the train tracks are right there. Downtown is less than 5 minutes away, really. I can see Winter Haven, California, actually, in the background here from the entrance. So it's already presenting me with a little different picture than what I had in my head. Whenever you see photos or a lot of videos of this place, what you see is artfully constructed shots that make it look like it's out in the middle of nowhere, out in the middle of the desert still. But really, it's within an easy walk. Downtown, nice hotels. You can easily see why the prison was constructed here up on these bluffs above the Colorado River. They're almost sort of cliff-like. And back in 1876, when the first inmates were brought here, there were no tall buildings in town. This was the highest point around 4 miles, at least on the Arizona side, making escape very difficult. We're having to hop in here and pay the admission fee. Paying the $10. Look, this might be the only prison that wants to give you guns. Now, as I mentioned, this prison was first constructed in 1876. Out here when Arizona was very much the Wild West. If you compare this view from across the river to what you see out here today, you'll notice there are far fewer buildings out here. But that's okay, most of the missing buildings out here were houses for the guards, the superintendent's office, things like that. Beyond the Sally Port over there are many original prison elements remaining. Sadly, before we even get started, I gotta tell you, 1/3 of the property was destroyed by the railroad coming in through here, the modern railroad bridge and alignment. And many of the buildings were picked apart for their building materials, you know, window frames and things like that. Lumber, the salvageable adobe bricks, even. Luckily, the city of Yuma saved their prison. They recognized its importance, and we can still visit the 19th century Alcatraz of the Old West. 21st century. Dude, check it out. Check out the entrance right here. This is not someplace you would have wanted to be in the 1870s or 80s. Look at these thick iron gates. Compared to our own times, especially in America, the 19th century Old West was an absolutely brutish time period. Even in the cities and towns, much less in the prisons. These men were accustomed to hard, violent lives and participated in some violent crimes. And you can imagine that such brutal men back then would be meted out with very brutal punishment. For much of the year, the weather in Yuma gets way up above 100 degrees. And the first men brought out here to occupy the prison were forced to actually dig the first cells into the bluff and build this place with their own hands. Building your own prison, that's pretty close to digging your own grave. Not most people's idea of a fun pastime. Wow, look at this museum. It's actually a lot bigger than I was expecting it to be. This building is not original, but it's a sort of approximate reconstruction of the old mess hall, rebuilt in the 1930s during the New Deal, I think. You've got all kinds of artifacts and historic photos of the prison guards out here, the superintendents or the wardens, and of course, lots and lots and lots of photos of the prisoners. For one thing, it's awesome that they have photos of the prisoners. Makes it a lot easier to imagine them populating this place. But in a more important way, particularly in the early years, this was super high technology. To have an actual record of what a criminal looked like back then was a big deal. Fingerprinting databases, and now of course we have DNA. It's much harder to disguise yourself and throw on a wig or a fake mustache. Back then, this was some pretty high-tech stuff, being able to keep track of who was who. Dude, there's a lot of fire.
It's gotta drop down once.
Museum, let me tell you, none of it is more impressive than this. Look at that freaking Gatling gun right there. Look at the size of that gun. Talk about futuristic technology and firepower. Apparently, they used one of these bad boys in one of the guard towers here. Now see, I would not want to try to escape under the watchful eye of this freaking thing, that is for sure. And back then, the guards knew how to shoot. Look at this guy right here, Harry Murphy, sentenced to 3 years out here for burglary. This guy, William Styron, got 25 years for robbery. Samuel Gray right here, convicted of manslaughter. Only 5 years for him. This guy almost looks like a kid. This Jay Hamill here, sentenced to a year for burglary. That was probably 1 year he did not enjoy. Grand larceny, burglary for this guy. This guy, H.J. Simmons, a farmer. He was a forger. This guy was sentenced for a year and a day for giving, selling, and disposing of intoxicating liquor to an Indian. Quite a few manslaughterers in here, but not many murderers. This guy sold to murder. This guy 30 years for murder. Expect lots more murderers to be in the jail, right? Not only that, it's surprising to learn there was only ever one hanging carried out here at Yuma Prison. It was of this guy, Martin Eos. He actually murdered another inmate here. Nowadays, when and if we ever execute any criminals, we would do it at places like jails, facilities, all that. Back then, though, if you were convicted of murder, you were a lot more likely to be hung right there at the courthouse where you were convicted and sent to prison. As a matter of fact, right up here, you can actually see a list of the various crimes. The 3,069 prisoners incarcerated here committed. You can see it broken up by category there. Over a third of them were burglaries. And if you combine the burglaries with assault, mayhem, and riots, you get well over half of the totals. Relatively, comparatively, few murders. The one murderer who was hung here, Martin Ubios, or Ubios, actually had invitations sent out for his hanging. It was such a rare event. This is a little morbid. That is the actual weight that they're used to stretch out the hangman's rope, so that when they opened the trap door, that rope would be perfectly taut and do its business. And they strung poor Martin up. Anyway, there's some great stuff in here that we definitely want to check out. Enough of the museum. It's time to go to prison. And here we go. Out into the yard. Holy cow. This is what we came to see. This is where I figured we'd end up. At last, I feel like we finally made it to the world-famous Yuma Territorial Prison. Well, technically, more strictly speaking, what's left of it is right in front of us. And of course, there was a hospital built above it. So there were buildings on top of these other prison buildings, and this would have been dark and enclosed. This main avenue here, that's your money shot. There it is, the Territorial Prison. They have been slightly more shaded by the buildings up on top. We're still talking about a time long before air conditioning was not a comfortable place to be, not by a long shot. Look at that. There was not much to these cells at all. These were brutal men locked up during a brutal time behind 2 sets of iron doors. Look at that. Look at the size of that latch right there. One thing's for sure is you were definitely secured in there. That is for certain. Look at that. Look at that secondary door right there. That is out of control. Some of these cells, you would have 6 guys in there, packed in together, sleeping on 2 sets of iron bunk beds with nothing but 1 bucket for a bathroom. Look at this, they've got 3 dummies in there, dumb enough to get locked up, including 3-Finger Jack. And it might be hard for you to hear, but he's talking about his crimes in a very long story. There's quite a long recording going in there explaining what he did and how he landed in prison. There's quite a bit of information about him in the museum where he's listed as a rabble-rouser. He was arrested for causing a huge riot. Back then, they didn't take kindly to protesting or agitating, and if you started a riot, you ended up at places like this. 3-Finger Jack himself, I believe, was here for quite a long time, 03 to 1906, which doesn't sound like a long time until you realize that was the rest of his life. He died out here on one of the prison farms, what they called back then heat prostration. That's after